likely that a family is going to have two people working. I know family size differs between races. In the white community, Indian community, than, say, in the black community. If you say, but gee whiz, that means that South Africa must be some. I think part of the thing that they also don't say is if you look at the employers and the self-employed, which we'll get to just in a minute, and you look at the employee-only rates, it drops to about 29% for black folk and 55% for white folk. So the difference is then the self-employed and the employers in this country. And that will have a huge influence. Here we are with the employers. 14% of all whites are either self-employed or employers. In fact, 9.5% of whites are employers. Of white adults, 9.5% of white adults are employers. All right? That would also make, just think about that connection. It means 1 in 10 white families out there, in one form or another, maybe sometimes there are 2 employers in one family, but let's say on average, okay, would be employing somebody. So the chances, if you're white, of knowing an employer is quite good. Would you agree with me? 1.2% of black adults are employers. So your chances are quite a lot less of knowing an employer if you want a job, if you're black. Would you agree with me? So that also makes a difference. Can you stop somebody? Do you want to stop somebody being an employer? No, because we need employers. Okay, so that's also important. All right, the difference is made up obviously by the self-employed. Very often we've done some work. This comes from work we did for APSA a quarter ago. So these numbers pertain to the first half of this year from the quarterly, but they don't change that much. Just giving you, a background. But there's a lot of self-employed in South Africa. Just put it into perspective, 1.9 million people work for themselves or employ others. But of that 1.9 million people, only 700,000 employ others. We've had quite a big drop, which nobody talks about. Really, nobody talks about. 275,000 people employ 5 or more people other than themselves in South Africa at the moment. That's down from 325,000. We're missing 50,000 employers right now to what we had 10 years ago. Do you think that has an influence on your ability to get a job? Okay. So shouldn't these be the things that we'd be looking for? The real concern. Why are people disappearing from being employers? No matter what you think of your employer, you need him first to complain about him. Okay? I am an employer, so then from labor dynamics, which is where they put the income these days, but they don't give us the full detail as I would like it, but we're working on that from Stats SA. It turns out that the median employer earns 3.1 times more than the normal employee. Okay, he doesn't eat some, but you must remember the median employer is employing roughly about 3 people and himself. Okay, so, and the median employer, if you want about, the average firm size is just over 4, that's including the employer. So the self-employed, we've got a problem because a lot of them are in subsistence. The self-employed, they only earn about 2/3 of what the employees earn. So the self-employed are people taking a huge risk, okay, in many cases, and get very little reward. That's something that we also need to look at. We don't have this in the census, but that's just putting this race issue in a little bit of context to me. Then the other fact, where people get their money from. This comes out in the Income and Expenditure Survey, which is similar to their census. The census here you saw 365. But when they dished it out, and this is again on families, they haven't given us the per capita ones yet. And now we know white families are more likely to have 2 people working there, but that's the income from work on top there. That's only 5.5 times. So even the headline earnings is semi-wrong. they should have said family income, not earnings. Right? Because now it sounds like it's if you work as a job, somehow, even if you work for government, people discriminate against you because you're black. All right? Then we go and have a look. If I wanted to play devil's advocate, I could say, well, social pensions, white folk only get about a third of what black people get in social pensions. It's unfair. Okay, you can say white folk don't need it, but the point is, okay, it's there. I could play around with these statistics. I could have lots of fun. Okay? And then this last thing, the inputted rent. Now, this inputted rent story I'll show you now is a little bit of a thumbfuck. Okay? No, statisticians are very good at that too, and economists. So they decide, okay, black folk, and I'll show you rooms now, have only 9,000 rand, and 9.6 times more as white folk in inputted rent. Remember, this is not really money you get. This is the money they ascribe to the value of your house that you should get in lieu of rent. So that's also part of your income. It's not a physical cash. It's a way that governments thought up through the UN some time ago how to make you feel richer. Okay? But they play around with it. So you can see about 70 to 80% of the income is from work. For whites, it's 70%. For colored folk, about 80%, which is quite strange, that difference, but haven't investigated that. And black folk only get about 11% of the value from inputted rent, less than other races, groups, which is a derived figure, and I'll talk a bit about that now. But here's another thing. They got this is a statistic that they got wrong. If you go back in the census document, well, not this one, their first release, at the back it talks about parental survival. I phoned the BMR at UNISA about this as well, and there was somebody from Stats SA called Eric there. No, we weren't supposed to talk about the orphans. That's why we made this mistake. But there they go, and they say, fine, 15.4% of South Africans have lost their father figure, and 7.4% have lost their mother figure, and 3.7% have lost both their parents. And then they talk about 18.8% of all South African children are, in one form or another, have lost at least one parent. So no matter which way I look at it, if I take the 7.4 and the 15, I get to 22, and if I then add the 3, I get to 26 type of thing, 3.7 or whatever with a comma points, it gets to 26%. So believe me, statistics South Africa's adding abilities are not that great. But the problem that we have here is that that's also a factor. And they didn't put this in race. Why not? Would it be inflammatory? I'm not trying to be inflammatory. I'm just saying, if you put income in race, but you put that statement out there, then you need to also say, but wait a minute, AIDS is affected, because it would most likely be, I'm not saying it is, just most likely, be that's affected lots of black people vis-a-vis HIV and AIDS. Would you agree with me? And that needs to be addressed. The South African Institute of Race Relations has shown that black kids have a very, very big chance of living in a single-parent family, more so than whites, which would also affect at the end of the day. So when whites have 2 people on average in a family, you're talking about 2 older people. Their kids are out of the house very often. All right? So, but when you talk about 2 people in a family, for black folks, it's more likely to be a mum and the kid. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? All right? I'm not saying, but they haven't released that detail yet. So we can't say that for sure. But that must also have an impact. So these are things that are important. So it also says you can have sex but fucking condomize, okay? No, it's what it boils down to. The rural-urban split. All right, we have urbanized as a country. The bright lights of the city, you earn more at the bright lights. Why would you go to the city to earn less? Okay, so city people generally earn more. We don't know that, the size of the household, and yes, apartheid and its education does still play a role in the differences. Let's not beat around the bush. That's a fact. I'm not here to make excuses. It's there. But then I would also argue that in many cases, as Mampela Rampela has pointed out, our education is not as good as we would like it to be. And it's really, really cuck in township schools, to put it mildly. And you know that. You know that more than I do. And then just something on lying in surveys. Here's the expenditure survey weights and the inflation weights that we're going to use next year. So can you see what happens? Houses and electricity, people said they spent nearly a third on, turns out it's going to be a fifth. When people said they spend 17% on transport, it's actually 15%. You know? They don't quite have the BMW and the 17-story house that they thought they had. Okay, but they tell everybody. Okay, that's first of all. So this is mainly from that side. But the other thing is that they told us, this Stats SA, but it's also known internationally. When a surveyor comes along, you're seen as a dominee. Yeah? Because the first thing that you do is they ask, do you gamble? No. Do you drink? No. All right. Do you go to restaurants? Very occasionally. Do you smoke? Certainly not. Okay. Fok, ek's bly daai fokker is weg, laat ek opsteek. Okay? So that's the fact. It's a worldwide fact. Okay, and people undervalue the food that they have. All right? They do. So on the expenditure survey, by the way, we're at 12.8% expenditure on food. When the Americans did theirs for their inflation and they did theirs, they got to 13%. Do you want to tell me that we're so rich that we spend less of our income than Americans on food? Okay, I'm going to prove to all of you you're all capitalists, first of all, when we get there just now. Okay, the chief capitalist being Bladen and Zamandi. But, no, he is. Look at his car. All right, he only drives German capitalistic cars. He doesn't play around with anything. And every capitalist will tell you they need an iPad. I mean, socialist. We seemingly spend massive on houses. We brag about our cars, but little on maintenance. And we always spend more than we earn. I'll show you that as well, or some of us do. On income, we don't know the difference between gross income, net income, and somewhere in between, I've read now, and I'm not sure of that fact, how big it is, but a guy down my street who's the credit ombudsman, Mani van Schalkwyk, was quoted as saying, and I have no reason to doubt him, that between 10 and 15% of our workforce has garnishing orders. Some of those guys are taking home zilch. Okay, that's not right. But people forget that. Loan repayments. You know, the percentile system crashed at stages over the last decade as the microloans were coming off. Okay, people forget that companies pay the part of the pensions, at least, on their behalf. When I was at Transnet, you paid 7.5%, the company paid 7.5%. But when you looked at your annual salary, you know, before they got to cost to company, and they got a bit cleverer, they didn't point out their 7.5% in the process. What people also forget, for example, government paid in a few billion rand into the GEMS government employee medical scheme. That came on nobody's pay sheet, but if you take a few billion rand here and you have to spread it over, you know, it's money. So people forget that type of stuff. And people lie because they want to keep on getting social grants at the poorer end. Okay? Because they've heard that you don't get a social grant if you earn more than 20 or 25,000 a year. So what do? Every time they clean up the system, what do they find? 40,000 civil servants. The minimum pay in a civil servant is 55,000. You're not supposed to get a social grant. Okay? And it happens year after year after year. Okay, so what about the other part where people are not civil servants, but they are doing irregular work? So when you ask them, their motivation is to lie because they're scared you're going to tell somebody that you're actually getting some money in. Would you agree with me? And on the richer side, on my side, huh? Fucking jy vir die tax man. Huh? Dink jy ek gaan jou vertel wat ek earn? Jy's gerook, man. Huh? But anyway, so let's have a look. This is the total expenditure and total income. That's an income included that inputted house rent, because on the other side it's there as well. includes all social grants, everything. The lower part, the poorest of the poor, all right? The poorest of the poor have got a bank manager. They can get twice their income and expenditure every year. How does that happen? Do you understand what I'm getting to now? So, and despite the fact that we know people underestimate their food purchases and they don't drink. Do you drink, sir? Do you drink? Only appetizer, that's the answer, okay. Sweats or nothing. All right. So, then the second quartile spend on, we must have the most financially able system in the world, or it must be bankrupt by now. I think you should sell all your ABSA shares, okay, immediately. And then here from the fourth, it's closer to the truth, maybe, and right down here. But I did something interesting. I then said, okay, let's take away the inputted rents, other incomes, which we know people also lie about a bit. They probably understate that as well. And what happens? If you just look at income from work, total expenditure, and look what happens to that. 4 times, the guy at the bottom. So that must be an indication that there is some form of lying going on. You cannot live 4 times beyond your means if you're that poor. Twice is unbelievable. 4 times is really unbelievable. Okay? So now you come down and you get to the 6th group, and they're overspending. And then in the bottom end, they're able to save, on the top end, I mean, because they have the money, they can put some aside. Because remember, in economics, it's very simple. It's your income minus your expenditure equals your savings. Okay, and we've got some funny things like when you put your money in a unit trust, it's not saving in economics, it's expenditure. But that's for another day. Okay, so that's one aspect why I think. But there's been lots of proof, and this is an older slide of mine. It's about 2010, March. These are the amount of people that have savings in the bank, families. It comes from the AMS survey. Own home comes from the General Household Survey. Quarterly labor force employment reports for that year, 5 million people with a pension fund. Remember, that's different to a retirement annuity. What we don't have is provision, what's the other one? Provident funds here. But it turns out between 7 and 9 million people in South Africa, there is some double counting. It's actually over 9 million, but we know there is people that have a pension fund and a retirement annuity and likes, okay, have that sort of saving in this country. That's quite a bit of wealth that we have in this country that we don't always realize, because the Europeans, as you know, have now got a big problem. The state pays your pension. The state is bankrupt. So if you're old in Greece and you're on a government pension, you're a bit stuffed. You can go to the chemist, but you won't get the medicine because the government can't pay unless you put cash on the table, and you never plan for that. Do you know what's happening? It's an interesting thing. You've heard of the Mediterranean diet. People around the Mediterranean live a long time. It's exactly those countries that are in trouble. Okay? So now what did those countries do? Just by the by. Do you know that you're now allowed to use drugs in Portugal and Spain and Greece? It's coming up as well. So this is one way to take care of your population, is if you can get them. And then the next step, obviously, this is just for usage. You can legalize the selling. Just think about it. It's a very clever idea, how to get out of a debt trap, because then you can tax it. And you can add it to GDP if it's no longer illegal. And you can lift your GDP rate. Yeah, it's a fact. Just think about it. So, and your pen. Yeah, and the older people will die quicker. Okay, which is also a big thing because your pension liabilities are unfunded. Okay, so that's by the by. Now here's something that should be a success story. If I was government, I would say this. We looked up at all the rooms, it's in there, you can do it yourselves, that people have. So we looked at, people said they had 1 room, we times it with 1. Okay, the amount of people, and if they had 2, the amount of people, and so on. And by race. 79% of our population, I understand, is African. But 72% of all rooms is not too bad.